Hello, everyone. We are picking up the story of Augustus in lesson 27, where we are talking about some of the ways in which Augustus was very successful in legitimating his power. So let us start by looking at this slide. So this is going to be further about representations and self-understanding from Octavian to Augustus. And in a slide that should be familiar to you, we talked already a little bit about Augustus trying to balance being a man of war and a man of peace. We talked about military defeat of all enemies, the revenge for the father, and pacifying the provinces. But what we are going to talk about today in a little bit more detail is a religious element that went into it, and a sort of deeper explanation that implied that, in fact, Augustus claimed that he was fated to be the first emperor of Rome in very subtle ways and sometimes in less subtle ways. So to start, I wanted to show you the shield of Augustus that was displayed in the location where the Senate met. And this is, of course, had that canon of virtues on it. So here is virtutis. You can make out the Latin yourself. Here is clemency, here is justitia or justice, and pietas, pietatis in the Latin, erga Deus patriumque, that is piety towards the gods and the fatherland. And I think this sense of piety that the Latin has here, this is, remember, before Christianity, is a little bit different, and it implies an obligation to take care of one's family, but also of one's household gods. And so this is this religious element is where I want to sort of to begin with today. So if you look at this image of Augustus, this is a different one from what we have seen so far. We have already observed the military image, the Prima Porta Augustus, and this is the Via Labicana Augustus. Again, it's named after its finding spot in Rome. And what it shows is Augustus weirdly dressed up and clearly having a hoodie on. And that piece, the hoodie, in fact represents that he is doing something with the gods. The Romans, when they sacrifice or participate in a religious ritual, they often cover their heads by pulling their toga up. And that's what he is shown doing here. And interestingly, Augustus's approach to being a responsible religious figure was to take on every single major priesthood that existed in Rome. And so far, we haven't talked quite that much about sort of religious institutions in Rome, but very importantly, there were different groups of priests, such as there was a bunch of individuals who are called pontifex, others the augurs, and there are a few other groups. But what's interesting about this is that traditionally in Rome, because there was such a strong commitment to sharing power, usually you could have a religious office and a political office. So that kind of separation didn't exist. You could be religious and political. But just as you had to share your power when you were a consul with another person who was your fellow consul, similarly, these priesthoods usually were exclusive. What that meant is that you were either a pontifex or an augur or one of the other ones, but you couldn't participate in every single one. Now, clearly, Augustus is going to challenge this. He's going to be a pontifex, he's going to be an augur, he's going to be one of these 50 men that's related to sort of looking at Greek oracles, and then another one, the 7 men or septemvir in Latin, is responsible for various festivities and a few other sort of traditional priesthoods. So one of the problems that he ran into, as you might recall from the Res Gestae, is that he in fact became a pontifex since 48. However, when Julius Caesar was killed and then, they formed the triumvirate, his fellow triumvir, Lepidus, was the Pontifex Maximus. So among the pontifexes, there is one who is the greatest, and that is the Pontifex Maximus. And that is something that he really hesitated to take from Lepidus. And you might recall from the chronology of the previous classes that that wasn't until 12 BC, so some 36 years into his membership in this priesthood, that he finally, when Lepidus died, was able to become Pontifex Maximus. What's important about this is that we have talked about sort of the offices that travel with the emperor, such as the major proconsular power or the tribune of the plebs. But what we will also see is that the Pontifex Maximus office will also travel with the emperor. So every single emperor will take on that, given that the previous emperor died. So it's very easy, but that will become part of the package. But I think that maybe just as important as that all emperors are Pontifex Maximus, that Augustus has this sort of taking them all type of attitude, which is very characteristic of his way of taking on power, right? He is sort of going for all in. He's going to be a member in every single priesthood. The reason I point this out is that when we look at our next slide, which is a depiction of the Augustan Forum, the Forum of Augustus, what we see here is in fact a similar all-encompassing attitude. And in a beautiful representational layout, what happens here is that Augustus creates a forum, again, a big, large, open public space with a temple on it. And we already discussed that the temple belongs to Mars, and the particular Mars, that is Mars the Avenger. Here is the temple. You can see the steps up, and here's the altar up front. In the ancient world, the altar is always outside up front the temple. So here we are, and we see that on the pediment, on the front of the triangle, so right here, if you look, we see that in addition to Mars, he will also have Venus, who is, of course, was claimed by Julius Caesar, Fortuna, and then also Romulus and Roma are all represented there. So again, we see this sort of like he's taking them all, right? He's not just choosing Mars the Avenger, who's the whole temple building belongs to, but he will add some other supporting gods as well. Another way in which the Forum of Augustus that he built was also representative of his sense that he was this all-encompassing figure was its claim to Rome's traditional history. So the whole structure of the Forum suggests if you enter here, in the middle you would see Augustus in a chariot, right, somewhere up front. It's not represented here because you're not absolutely certain about its location. But what you see is that the structure sort of shows two sort of areas here, one associated with Aeneas, Rome's sort of pre-founder, and the other one with Romulus, the first king, right? And here we see also figures of the Julian family going back a long way. And here in the Romulus section, we see a number of Republican heroes. In fact, all along the way, as you are progressing down on these two porticos here on the sides, if you walk down there, you see various Republican heroes with their little statues in all these niches. And a good way to think about this is to say that essentially anybody who was worth remembering from Republican history got a little niche with their statue in it, and also a plaque that sort of identified who it was, implying essentially that all that history was leading to Augustus, right? So every single figure ultimately is pointing towards this history to come. So here we are, the great men in another representation, a great men, right? And Aeneas and Romulus on the two sides. Again, all encompassing, all these parts are sort of leading to him. And of course, the building site is very close to the Forum of Julius Caesar, sort of making that connection geographically or physically also in space. A nice reconstruction here would show us, how this looked, that you here in the niches would be all these all these statues implying the connection to Rome's traditional history. Now, this is what this looks like today if you visit Rome. So obviously not super well preserved, but some niches can be seen even though the statues are now gone. And it really confirms this sense that Augustus made this claim that in fact all of Roman history was implying that he should be the ruler. So this sort of fatedness is also well represented in other building projects that Augustus undertook. And those included a number of buildings on the field of Mars, where Augustus planned for himself a mausoleum where he was going to get buried, and on the sides of which he built those pillars that held his res gestae, a sundial, solarium, which was a way to sort of show time. And in fact, on Augustus's birthday, the sundial pointed at this building here, which is the altar of peace, about which more in a moment. So what we see here is sort of very careful, deeply meaningful building projects that sort of represent things that he might not say directly, but it's definitely implied, whether on the statues on the Forum or whether in the form of, the sundial pointing at his altar of peace. We get this message that Augustus was meant to be, he was meant to be the ruler of Rome. This is where we're going to pick up the story next. Thank you.